I'm going to change tactics a little bit right now, Ted. I mean, because all this is interesting. I think we could talk for about 7 hours with you.
Easily, yeah.
You know, but I want to try to find out for you if you could comment about the transformative power of this dance, sort of the unifying things about this dance from, you know, its origins in Harlem in 1928 until now, where you have people in Sweden and, you know, in Singapore and in China getting into this. What do you think that the strongest and most powerful links that sort of keep that dance sort of alive in its various iterations and forms?
Well, I think culturally it draws on everything. I mean, I can't help feeling that's, the more I think about it, I think that's it, you know, because, you know, the European and the African are pretty obvious. But if you say, you know, if we talk broadly, I mean, the broad distinction people make in the world about, when we're talking culture, I'm not talking race, because I don't think there is any such thing. But, you know, broadly speaking, people talk about European, African, and Asian cultural forms. And within each one of them, of course, there's great variety. The thing about the Asian thing is that, first of all, is the contribution of Native American Indians, which are just not looked at, who are basically Asian, you know. And, you know, people tend to forget that, but Frankie Manning, Sugar Sullivan, you know, and so they're part Cherokee as well. I mean, they're not just, you know, because of American racial politics, we call them black, but actually, you know, there's all sorts of things there. And many artists, you know, you find that contribution to jazz just gets forgotten about altogether. But I mean, but even quite apart from that, there are definitely the sort of Islamic Asian roots in terms of the black contribution and even the European contribution, because again, things get terribly simplified, you know, into thinking there's black and there's white, there's European and there's African, as if everybody lives in cocoons and has nothing to do with each other, you know, and it's just not like that, you know. I mean, a good deal of the, say, African slaves that were brought to America come from the Senegal, Gambia region, heavily infused by Islamic, Asian forms of culture, you know, right the way across North Africa. Whereas and that gives a very different stamp to jazz as opposed to, say, Cuban music or Brazilian, where, because the Spanish and Portuguese, they didn't want any blacks who were influenced by Islam. You know, they didn't try that. You know, they would have been fighting Islam in Spain, so they didn't want to fight the same battle all over again in the New World. So they made sure they got theirs from the Congo and Angola and so on. You know, so jazz has that. I think one could even argue other Asian contributions coming in through in terms of the European. You know, European is not just European, if you know what I mean. And people come and go. I mean, after all, I mean, you've got people like Genghis Khan and so on, occasionally, a few centuries before that, descending on Europe and causing mayhem right across it, you know. There are many influences and so on, and I just think it's all in there. And I mean, so to me, there's something in it, you know, that when it's presented in an accessible form, and the problem with jazz is, as the history of jazz has been, people try and dress it up as some high art form, you know, that you have to have a more or less a degree in music to appreciate and all the rest of it. You don't need it, you know. You just hear it or you dance it and you know it's real. And it speaks to you. And it speaks to people right across cultures, and you know, I mean, she's always been this extraordinary story. I mean, don't forget the last emperor of China finished up as a crooner, didn't he, in a swing club, you know. People tend to forget that, you know. I mean, Hitler was playing jazz, wasn't he? Well, he wasn't playing it, but the other people were in the bunker when the Red Army were bombing the crap out of it. You know, when Rasputin was killed and assassinated, you know, they were playing jazz records. You know, some of the imperial princes were. You know, I'm sure if you went digging around, you'd find this weird, you know. generalization of this music and culture, you know, that just spread further and further. And then if you come back with inside the American experience, you know, everything was swung, you know, and people were finding a relevance to the music, you know. You know, at one point they were talking about a federal law to prohibit the swinging of the European classics, because they said this was, you know, this was a cultural, you know, crime to be doing it, you know. And needless to say, it didn't bite, you know, there wasn't anything to it. But again, that's something we don't get from current swing music. Every swing band, virtually, back in those days, they all had one or two European classical numbers in their repertoire, which they swung. You know, I mean, Lucky Millender's band is the one I know fairly well. They used to do a whole Tchaikovsky thing, which Lucky Millender used to particularly imitate the sort of European conductors, or the more demonstrative ones, and, you know, do all this with his hands and shake his head around. And at another place they would sing, you know, they would sing a section from the New World Symphony. The actual guys in the band would, you know, called Going Home, you know, from My Vlast, you know, and so on, you know. There was so much, you know, cross-referencing, you know. You know, people think all that stuff is new with sampling and all the rest of it, you know, but that was all happening back then, you know.
What do you think? I mean, there's some characteristic about Lindy Hop that differentiates itself from other dances, where you can find people today who will literally be on a certain career path and their life will change. They'll become obsessed. They'll do nothing but Lindy Hop for, you know, almost breathe it, live it, all the rest of it. And I assume, hearing some of the stories, that there's some of that sort of addictive quality, or something that the dance could take over people's lives. What do you think about it, about the Lindy in itself? That's so powerful?
Well, you've got to remember the same is happening obviously with Argentinian tango and stuff like that. The same, you could repeat the story. I mean, what seems to me to be more interesting is the fact that with the beginning of the 1960s, there was a decline of interest in partner dancing. So that's really when it came to end. So we see it all the same thing. Argentinian tango, mambo, and what was left of the Lindy tradition all suddenly took a nosedive. You know, I mean, there were certain efforts to keep it going here and there, special, but I'm talking in terms of popular social dancing. Then, at the end of the 70s, they all start coming up again. I mean, admittedly, the mambo starts coming back as salsa, but Argentinian tango comes back as it is, and Lindy comes back as that was. Now, they don't come back like they were before, but there's definitely a new revival of interest. So to a certain extent, there was the early interesting question, and that's a difficult one, because why did it, you know, to a certain extent, if you want to answer why did it come back, why did it go down the pan in the first place? You know, and that's obviously to do something with the new 60s. I mean, the 1960s seems to me to be an era of major cultural readjustment. And the cultural readjustment was that a great deal of the ideology and the outlook of certainly the 19th century, but really way before that, was still in existence. You know, I mean, for instance, I just saw, I was just looking at the first James Bond film, Dr. No. I think that was the first James Bond film. And it's just so incredibly racist. You know, when you look at it now, you know, you've got, I mean, the black guys in it are just playing minstrel guys, you know, big rolling eyes. Oh, boss, we're not going to go there, you know, because, you know, there's got this big dreadful dragon there on the island, and you see the dragon is obviously a truck, you know, a caterpillar thing, you know, with a flamethrower on it, you know, and any 5-year-old would work that one out, you know. But I mean, and there's the white man who goes around showing everybody what to do, and that had to go. You know, so in other words, there was a major piece of readjustment went on, because you just think in terms of the way everything's changed in terms of women's rights, all different types of minority rights, including the whole gender issue and all the rest of it. Been a fantastic change of outlook, and most of that, that stuff was done in the 1960s. So I think we can safely say that we were looking at a couple of decades when a big rethink took place. I'm not sure to myself, people talk about the 1960s a terribly radical time. I'm not so sure how radical it really was, But you could certainly say it was quite profound, in what was doing, Everybody came out of it differently, all the old stuff, had to go, And of course there's people down who regret that and who are trying to push it back to that, But, things have moved on,
What we talk about tango and mambo and all these things. What do you think differentiates Lindy from all these other dance forms? What makes Lindy unique? What makes it special? What do you think is its?
Well, mambo and my belief is, and obviously, when I'm really talking about New York style mambo, of course, where they do the partner dancing. That's really just a derivative of the Lindy, So that's the question of what rhythm do you like? If you prefer to dance to a Latin rhythm, then you go for mambo and salsa. If you like your swing straight ahead, well, then you go for the Lindy, don't you? And that's just down to you as a taste. Argentinian tango is different because Argentinian tango seems to me to be the other form of dance that incorporates improvisation, and it's a different sort of incorporating because it's almost like you take it in turns with proper Argentinian tango. You don't really do it at the same time. In other words, it's a bit like West Coast swing, Someone's the pivot and the other one does whatever they do, and then it's your turn, my turn, your turn, mine. Interesting thing about the Lindy, it's both at the same time, and that's what makes it so extraordinary. Which is why I challenge, get into a few arguments on this one. This is really the first new form of partnering. Because even the waltz and all the rest of it is all really derivative of the ballet. And in fact, the modern ballet comes in at the same time as the waltz does. In other words, at that turn of the century. And also, if you think of it, everything's in 3/4 time. All that early Tchaikovsky stuff they were doing it to is all 3/4 time and so on. So the Lindy comes in and it challenges the whole nation of partnering. And I think in some senses, I think that's probably the weakness in a lot of the current understanding of the Lindy, is that people haven't really quite got to that point yet. They haven't quite understood the degree to which it does incorporate improvisation. In other words, people still want to stick too much to almost like set choreographies. We do this step, and then we do that step, and then we do that step. And if you don't know the right sequences of steps, no one wants to dance with you. Which is a big mistake in my opinion, because the whole thing is that wonderful fluidity, of the proper dance form, which is what you read about, because otherwise, how do you explain these descriptions of the Savoy, where people were saying when you saw the floor packed full of people, it was like there was a movable glass wall between, so someone described it as a movable glass wall between each couple, so nobody touched or kicked each other, but it was like the wall was fluid, if you can imagine it, and they all, so it was like an amoeba-like thing, that just kept, but everybody touched because everybody was together on it. Now, so not only were their improvisation with each other, but it's with everybody around them as well, and that's extraordinarily skilled, accomplished form of dance form, which in some ways, I believe we just haven't got back to yet. Hopefully we will. But the problem is, people have got to get away from the dance teacher-led approach, because you've got to find it in here. You can't be doing what someone else is telling you to do. You've got to be dancing it for yourself for real, in order to do that, because that's how it works then, If everybody's on the same page like that, then you all mesh together, It's a bit like, if you like, it's like the jazz chorus line, like in the big shows they used to have at the Apollo and you see the conventional chorus line is like the Rockettes, or something like Radio City. Everybody's just like a soldier, you do exactly what the person next to you does. So everybody's doing, the jazz chorus line is not like that. Everybody's a bit different. And it's that wonderful unity of the general and the particular. You can all be doing your individual thing, but you're doing it together. And it's real. So often some people can look at it. Someone's looking at that person. They see two different shows almost. It has that infinite variety in it.
Wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about how, on a personal level, how the Lindy Hop has changed you?
Yes, that's a difficult one. What happened? Muradin, the writer, says. I always like quoting her because although some people snarl and spit when you mention her name, she said some profound things. And one of them, she said, she's talking from a woman's point of view, of course. She said the Lindy Hop is like marriage. You get 2 or 3 good partners in life if you're lucky, and that's it. And I know what she meant, you know, in the sense that there are certain people you click with, and the dancing is magic, you know, absolute magic. You can actually feel your way into that other person's body. You can feel every little nuance of what they're doing. Now, you can't do that with the average dancer. And it doesn't mean to say they're not a good dancer, you know, at all. It's just that it's a whole complex of reasons, you know, that makes 2 people dance together. And I'd say it's very similar to the fact that you can't necessarily put a bunch of good musicians together and expect to get a good jazz band or a good swing orchestra. You know what I mean? There has to be a special chemistry between them that makes it click and really, you know, gives it that energy. And it's the same with a partnership. You know, there's something almost indefinable about it, but you know it. You know it when you've got that person. And so what you tend to do, I think, the person is, it's almost like when you start getting some idea of the intensity of the dance and the meaning of the dance, you start looking, although you don't realise you're looking, and you know, and you're dancing with lots of people, and you become almost like a dancing fool. You know, you're out there just on the floor hitting it, you know, and you get soaking wet, and you know everything's disgusting. You know, but the only thing is everybody else is disgusting, so you know you get away with it, right? So. So you go through big sort of periods in your life where you, you know, where you do this dancing, and that's what's happened to me, you know. And so I would say that I used to be one of the clumsiest people around, and some days I still am. But on the other hand, Lindy taught me a coordination of my limbs and body and stuff like that, you know, which I'd never, I'd never have got any other way. It gave me a sense of balance, you know. I used to trip over the paving stones, let's put it like that, on the street all the time. I've never done, since I started dancing, I never tripped over again. You know, it gives you a possession and an understanding of your body. The sad thing, in a way, is that when you find the right people to dance with, it takes the edge off it. You don't really want to dance too much with anybody else after that. It's almost like you've climbed Mount Everest, you know, you got there. You're not going to climb another one, because there isn't another one, you know, unless you go to another planet, you know. That's it, you've done it. But, you know, you can still, you know, have a good dance and enjoy yourself, and you still, so there is, and obviously what that sense is, that when you get there, I think, you know, you've got that sense that you've done it all, you know, and you really, you know, you really feel it, you know, I mean.
How did it change you as a person, aside from the physical aspect of being and having that affect this whole process, and looking at yourself in 1983 and now, and how the dance has been a part of changing you as a person?
Well, I mean, the dance changes you intuitively, you know. I mean, it makes you more aware, I think, of the oneness of people, you know, and you know, the general aspect, you know. But in a way, that's not going to register it consciously, because, you know, you still get people, you get people, I mean, you hear every now and then, you hear, so, well, the only people did more dancing, and people wouldn't go out and kill each other in wars, you know, and stuff like that, you know, which is a pretty empty sort of truism in my mind. I mean, you just think of the Battle of Waterloo, and both sides had major balls the night before the dance, and then they went out and killed each other, you know. I think it's, I don't think one can quite say that it's going to change your whole outlook, you know. I just don't think it works like that. But in a way, but where I think it can work is that, that's what it's done for me, is that when I became aware of the inadequacies of our understanding about the Lindy Hop, and I started studying it and trying to answer questions, and that, it was answering those questions. I mean, you couldn't answer those questions without the dance. The dance had to exist first. Then when you got into those questions and you started you know, trying to understand it more, then it really started changing me, you know, because I'd say now, I consider myself, like, I don't really consider myself British anymore. I mean, I had quite a bit of that in me, and really coming to America sorted a lot of that out for me, you know. I consider myself much more as citizen of the world now, I'm not interested in bloody passports or nationalities or stuff like that, you know. I think there's all cultural traditions we should be proud of and all the rest of it. But this stuff, my country, right or wrong, and all the rest of it, I just think it's a load of nonsense. You know, we've got one planet, you know. We've got one planet, and we either use it or abuse it. And unfortunately, as you know, most of the thing going on at the moment is the abuse thing, which threatens us all. Doesn't matter really whether you're one of the perpetrators or you're one of the people trying to recycle your plastic bags. You know, the trouble is everyone's going to get caught up in the same disaster at the end of the day. So I do think that in a certain sense that anything that promotes a oneness of awareness about what we have in common, and the fact that you can dance with someone, you know, right across from the other side of the world, and suddenly and if you're lucky you find someone really meaningful to dance with, you know. I mean, for instance, say you do, I don't know, Appalachian clog or Irish step dancing or Indian katak dancing or something like that. The chances of finding somewhere on the other side of the world are not great unless they happen to have studied that particular thing. Somehow or other, I just think the Lindy still has that. As the major social, as it's turned out to be, the major social participatory form in swing culture, you know, as a world, almost like as a world culture. I mean, just take World War II. I mean, that's the example I think that tends to get thrown away. Swing was the music of the Allies, and it was never given the credit. And even the music and the dance of the Allies. I mean, every division in the Red Army and the Red Navy had a swing orchestra. You know, people across Europe, oppressed by the Nazis, were playing swing music and even dancing the Lindy Hop, you know, or, you know, versions of it in opposition to the Nazis, quite consciously so, you know. And I think perhaps we ought to, I can't even tell you his name, but the young guy, for instance, who was beheaded for dancing swing by the Gestapo, you know, perhaps we should remember that guy, isn't it? Or the two young Jewish sisters, you know, who were avid swing fans and were dragged off to Auschwitz. They survived, but they had some pretty horrible things done to them before they came out, you know. I mean, these were kids who, I mean, their bravery, you know, their courage, you know, in the face of adversity was just extraordinary, isn't it, you know. And, you know, I mean, you don't get that elsewhere, you know. They weren't doing it for Beethoven. I mean, to be honest, you know, and there's nothing wrong with Beethoven. I love his music, you know. In fact, the Nazis were playing that and they loved it, you know. But, I mean, you know, this is, the, you know, and really, in a sense, everybody threw it away at the end of World War II. The Russians suddenly clamped down and disbanded the swing orchestras. The Americans refused to play jazz on their radios anymore, you know. You know, so we had this absurd period in the Cold War when they were broadcasting swing music to the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, and they refused to play it on American radio. You never heard the music in America, you know. I mean, it was almost as if they were so intent on dividing the world that they wanted to, you know, throw away the very thing that brought it all back together again. In England, they did their very best to stop jitterbugging in the ballrooms and all the rest of it. You know, there were signs, big signs, no jitterbugging, no jiving on the walls everywhere. You know, they tried to stop it. You know, and this is what everybody wanted to do. You know, it makes no sense, does it? You know.
Before we end, you know, I wish we could go on for, and we probably will again, but I think, you know, in the future. But one thing, if you could look back on your history with this dance, you know. If you can pick 2 or 3 moments that you would sort of qualify as transcendent moments for you, for whatever reason, whether that's a personal or historical or whatever, what would those moments be, and can you spend some time describing them?
Well, I told you when I went to the Lyceum Ballroom in 1961 and I saw people collectively making the floor pulse. And remember that it's a solid floor, it wasn't a sprung floor. And even now, I just think of the awesome power of people dancing. I mean, because that was the thing. And of course, you know, there were some dreadful occasions, you know, when it was so strong that the people collapsed the buildings, you know, and then people died as a result. I mean, it's just that power and energy of it, you know, and it's a collective thing that only the Lindy can pull together. You're not going to do that doing mambo or tango. As much as I love those dances as well, you're not going to punch a hole through the floor, you know, which you can with the Lindy. I mean, it can collapse buildings, you know. It's that effective. It has that awesome quality to it. And obviously, I have to say that obviously before that, it was just for me 1956 and seeing those dancers on the screen. It was just like like someone had just brought out a bath full of icy cold water and thrown it across you. It just gave such a shock, what we saw. But that was probably a very special British reaction. And then I think I have to say that I still think that time I was just invited round to Billy Ricker's place by Frankie and Norma, and just sitting there, and it's just surreal. That's all I can say about it. There we were, sitting down in someone's flat apartment in Harlem, and watching them talk about Day at the Races and Hell's a Poppin', and these were the guys who were in it, first time round. I mean, now it's become almost routine, hasn't it? But it was just the magic of it. You got so conditioned into people not naming black dancers, not giving them the credit that they were due, not paying the deference to them that they deserve, and then suddenly there you were doing it. Oh, that's so and so. There's Al. There's everybody was there. And they knew everyone. And a friend of mine who teaches in London, he's just said that he showed these clips to people, and particularly American students, because we got a lot of exchange students coming to London. And he said it's just, he still can't get over it, that once you name the dancers and you give a few identifying quality, all the students are astounded by the way they suddenly see them differently. They're real people, in other words. So we have a sort of tricky legacy in some way, if we don't handle it right, if we don't learn who was who, and we don't learn who to acknowledge, in a way that we've been doing right recently in a big way. But without that, you see, you can't fight the stereotypes, and these stereotypes are insidious. Oh yeah, black people just dance because that's... Not all black people dance. There's loads of black people who've got no sense of rhythm at all. Just as like there are loads of white people who have a great sense of rhythm and they can dance. I mean, these things are spread right across it. It's just that some people live in cultures which encourage them to dance, and other people live in cultures which don't encourage them to dance. And really, everybody should be encouraged to dance, shouldn't they? Whether they can do it or not. That's the way we're going to pull things round.
Wonderful. Any last comments that you want to leave? If you were to make a few comments that we haven't covered, anything, my line of questions, if there's any last comments you'd sort of like to leave the camera with for the audience.
Well, I suppose, I suppose the main thing, I suppose that this is a negative point, but main thing for me is I don't like the term swing dance because in the way it's used, because people mean the Lindy Hop and jitterbug to it. And I just feel that we forget the real experience that these people went through back in those times when they were talking about all the dance forms that went to swing music, and it wasn't just the Lindy. Yes, Lindy was the major form of social participation, but it was only at times a hair's breadth from some of the other dancers. They'd be looking at tap dancers and say, we can do some of that. After all, they all did the Susie Q, didn't they? There's lots of tap Susie Q, there's Lindy Hop Susie Q, and Shorty George and so on. There's lots of crossover in it. Same with the acrobatic dance, the eccentric dance, the jazz chorus line, And I'd just say to people, if you're going to talk about the Lindy, talk about the Lindy. If you're going to talk about swing dance, then talk about all swing dance. In other words, all the dancing done to swing music. Because don't forget, there's just as many tap dancers went out there on tour with the big swing orchestras as there were Lindy hoppers. And people loved it all. And that's another important ingredient. That's the way we're going to keep it alive. Cherish the diversity, and the richness of it all.